Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and Krista Moser and Creative Grids has come up with these two 60-degree diamond rulers. And they're very easy to use, and you'd be surprised at how many different patterns you can do with these rulers. You can use the large one or the small one, and they make fabulous patterns. So we can get an 8.5 inch and a 16.5 inch. And these 60-degree inch rulers can cut diamonds, triangles, hexagon, parallelograms, trapezoids. When you do buy the rulers, they do have instructions on how to use them. And you can always scan these codes and see actual demonstrations on how to use these rulers. There's been a lot of patterns designed for these rulers. And here's an example of just a few. They're very unique looking. They can be very modern. They can be traditional depending on some of the fabrics that you use. But they are a lot of fun and a lot of choices. There's also a free pattern. The free pattern makes this really fun table topper. This table topper, the pieces are cut out of fabric that has been sewn together, and you cut the diamonds from these pieces. So you can see here where those fabrics have been joined together. Then you have cut the diamonds and added on sides. But I'm going to take this pattern and I'm going to use only one fabric. So I will not be making these rows of fabric. I'm going to use a beautiful big border print. Big border prints usually have 4 of these stripes running along the length of the fabric, and these stripes run about 10 inches. So you will have 4 of these long stripes in each piece of fabric. So I'm going to take the large ruler and use the striped fabric to make that table topper. When we open up that fabric, we can see those 4 big long border prints. I'm just going to put some marks on the top of the ruler so you can see this ruler better, but you'll be able to use the ruler just the way it is. With this pattern, we're going to need 6 big points, which are those full diamonds. Then along the side, we're going to need 12 triangles. We're going to be able to get that all from the one ruler. The pattern has us make a little bit of a smaller size, but for today's project, I'm going to use this full ruler. But the directions will help with the sewing. So from this big print, we need to decide where we're going to get those 6 pieces and those 12 pieces from. We can cut so that this piece is running down the center, turn it on an angle. So we're going to be cutting along one of these edges, and we can have it so that we're going to get a part of that stripe. So we need to decide where we're going to cut those 6 diamonds. It might be helpful if you draw a little diagram. So if you want these stripes here running along the sides, do you want them coming out this way? So you can do a little diagram just to see how this is going to turn out. And then we need to cut these. You might want to put the fabric upside down and draw that cutting line first, because you will need to move the ruler so that it comes up to this point. And by drawing them on the back, it kind of will give us an idea on how we're going to want to lay them out and how do we want it to look. For myself, I am going to cut these big diamonds coming right down the center. So the flowers are going to follow from point to point. Depending on how you cut these, the edges of your fabric can be on the bias. And because of that, I would recommend to have your fabric pressed really well and a lot of starch. I'll starch from one side, turn it over, and starch from the second side. You can use starch, starch alternative, or even a fabric treatment. This particular pattern is 6 inches, so I'll be able to use that 3-inch mark and draw a line. I'm going to use that center line for that center of the ruler. Place it down. And now I can cut out this shape. So I have one diamond done. I can continue cutting the diamonds out down the side until I get 6 of these shapes. So I have these 6 shapes cut out, and just to have a sneak peek, when we're going to sew them together, these patterns are going to match up, and those flowers are going to run right to the tips. If we did the cut with a small stripe in the center, when they're joined together, it's the small stripe that's going to point out and the flower is going to join in the center. Now that I have my 6 diamonds, I need to do 12 triangles. To match up the diamonds, I will need 8.5-inch triangles. So we will have 8.5 inches from this point all the way down to that line. So we are going to need to cut 12 of this shape. So those triangles are going to fill that space. However, if you'd like, you can use another full diamond, and it's going to fit right inside. And here's an example. However, you would have to sew a Y seam. But by using triangles, it's just going to make that seaming straight, and it also gives us more design opportunities. We can cut those triangles not only with this fabric, but with a secondary fabric. She's put a stripe in the middle, and I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to put a beautiful yellow on both sides of that stripe. What we're looking for is a strip at 8.5 inches. So whatever you decide your strip needs to be, we just need to have 8.5 inches. The fabric strips are now 8.5 inches, and there's an 8.5-inch mark on the ruler. And I'm going to use that and cut my strips. So it's going to be coming up to this point. I'm going to line that up and cut. The little edge comes in a little bit, so we're going to be able to cut that, and that's going to be a great spot for us to match up. So once I cut that triangle out, I'm going to be able to cut off those little corners. When the one has been cut, I can rotate that ruler, line up the 8.5-inch mark to the top, and continue cutting out these shapes. Rotate and cut. So you're going to be able to cut these triangles right out of that whole strip. I now have 12 of these striped triangles done and my 6 diamonds. This is all we're going to need for the table topper, because we did change that stripe fabric to a solid. And we used the full measurement on the ruler. But the directions on how to sew them together are going to be the same. So we have 6 and 6 on each side, and they're going to be sewn onto one end of that diamond. And these little cutoff points are going to make it so they match up. So we do not have to worry about any of those dog ears. That little cutoff point will match up. So down one side for all of the 6, and then you're going to be able to sew on that second side. And those points will match up. As I'm sewing these triangles on, I'm not going to be pressing the seams. I will press this seam to set it, and then I'm going to use my hand and press that seam over. I do have a bias seam, so I do not want to stretch it, and my hand pressing with just that little bit of heat on that flat side will be enough. When the one side is done, I'll do the second side, same thing. Just set that seam with the iron and then fold it over and press it with your hand. We now have 6 new triangles. And we will need to take those triangles and make piles of 2. And those will go together. So we'll sew those 2 together and sew those 2 together. So we will end up with 2 of these shapes. With those 2 halves done, We only have one seam to match. Be sure to match your points and your corners, but you need just one more seam. We are now done, and the tabletop from point to point is about 37 inches, and it's ready to be quilted. Starting with that big border print really does give a lot of visual impact, and it saved us from having to sew all of those strips together. So we have those 6 diamonds in the center. It does end up being 6 diamonds around the outside, but we did turn those into triangles, and that way we had straight seams. You make it the same way as you do this pattern. Her strip sets were 6.5 inches, so she used the 6.5 inch mark on the ruler. I used the entire ruler, so I did need 8.5 inch strips. I did start with 1 yard of this border print, and it did give me the center and that little stripe going around the outside. Now you can make this all in one fabric. If so, I would recommend buying 2 yards, and that way you can fussy cut these points. If you only have 1 yard and you want to try this, you will need an extra ½ yard of a second color. So we have that large ruler and the small ruler. So you could use up all of the leftovers from this border print with a small ruler and get yourself a second quilt. The 60-degree diamond rulers are a lot of fun to use because you can use a lot of different fabric. You could fussy cut things, put stripes in it, sew up scrap fabric and use them up. There's not a lot of sewing, but there are bias seams, so I would recommend pressing well right at the beginning and use some starch. And there's so many different patterns that we can use with both of these rulers. I would recommend downloading this pattern because it does give us a lot of different tips and techniques on pressing and cutting. And depending on how you cut those original diamonds, this would look totally different every single time. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.